Hey, this is David Rovics with another episode of Fifth Estate Live, which is coming to you as usual every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. in GMT. And it goes out on various platforms, including the Facebook page of Popular Resistance and Cable Community Radio, and on YouTube and Twitter and elsewhere, and turns into a archived video and audio thing that you can consume at fifthestate.org or look for in podcast form if you look up This Week with David Rovics, wherever you get your podcasts. And this week, I'm very happy to be spending the hour with Dave Marsh, longtime music journalist otherwise, and author of many, many books, and founder of Creem magazine, and a contributor to the Fifth Estate going back to 1969, and a longtime friend of many involved with this project. And there is a ongoing sort of event involving panels and discussions and talks and other things every weekend for the next 3 weekends about Dave's work and vision, in fact. And it is all, you can sign up to that online series of events at landofhopeanddreams.co. And you can also, this is Fifth Estate Live. You can subscribe to the Fifth Estate at fifthestate.org. And if you do that in the near future, you'll get a copy of Peter Werby's latest novel, new debut novel, which is a fantastic book about Detroit in 1967. So with no further ado, Dave, great to have you on the show.
It's great to be on the show. You know, you're saying something about Peter. Peter was such an amazing person for young people. I don't know how many others besides myself, but, you know, I'd say to him, well, can I write about this? Can I write about that? Trying not to be over ambitious or anything, but still ambitious. And so there was this thing going on in Ann Arbor that looked
Which
like
you
it
wrote about in 69, in the summer of 69, right? And a wonderful article.
But there is no article except that I look at Peter, who I've maybe written a couple of column-long stories for, and say, I want to go down there and see what's going on down there. Because I knew the cops were out and all that. And Peter just said, okay, yeah, if you can get down there, go ahead and do that. I don't have anybody doing it. You know, and he had that kind of faith in people that he came to respect for what I think with me, it was just, I was like the little hippie who could or something. But you know, his door was open. And he paid me what is still to this day the compliment that I measure myself against. I don't think I've ever told Peter this, which is, he said to me when I got back, I wrote a story. It wasn't a great story. It was pretty good. He said, you know, the good thing about you is you're not a voyeur. He said, you know, you go in there and try to get the story. What's the story? And not just from one angle. And that's been so inspirational to me for 50, however many years, because it is. And I was going to tie that in with Van Morrison, because you were talking about your interviews. My interviews tend to be structured by some force other than myself. But they're not sloppy. It's just, I kind of go where the wind takes me. Mm. And I had never interviewed Van Morrison until about a year ago. And he's one of my, prime people. And so as I'm leaving this interview, which has wandered all over the place, to Van's father's record collection, to all this seemingly tangential stuff, and Van says to whoever's his handler that day, that was an interesting interview. It was kind of like a jazz interview. And I just thought, if you're going to be a Van Morrison fan, there is no pinnacle higher than that.
It's a great compliment. And I guess it was kind of what I was going for with a lot of my interviews, but then people said, well, that's more like just jagged than jazz, you know, I think. But you don't go for an arc when you do interviews. I mean, as an interviewer, you're not kind of thinking what's going to be the arc of this interview.
No, I'm trying to think of the first thing I'm trying to think of is what has everybody else already talked about? Pitch
Right.
that. And since I do so much rock stuff and so much classic rock stuff, or whatever you call it now, you don't call it classic now.
Hmm.
You know, you're in there, and you're trying to do something that's not so much original, but gives people a newer perspective on things. And that is something that I attribute to learning at the Fifth Estate. That Peter was not looking for what everybody else had done.
Yeah.
And he was rewarding to work for because he'd tell you what you did wrong, he'd tell you what you did right, and he'd encourage you to do what he liked more often. You can't get an editor any better than that. You know, to somebody that really kind of turns you loose within some kind of narrower spectrum and lets you learn on your feet.
You know,
I say something to Peter about it, about the whole thing that he did for me. He's not very good about acting, you know, because it's just what Peter's like. He doesn't ask you a lot of follow-ups on that stuff. But, you know, I sort of carry him in my back pocket all the time.
I hear that. Yeah. When you wrote that article in 1969 from Ann Arbor, Michigan, describing what basically sounded like a police riot, an ongoing
Mostly,
multiple
yeah.
day, and and it really wasn't going well. It seems for folks trying to hold the
For the good
streets.
guys?
For the good guys, yeah.
Yeah.
And it felt like in the article you're talking about. I mean, it kind of seemed like, you know, one of the things you mentioned was how if there were more organizing going on and more popular support for this movement, then things could go a little better. And it just seemed like you're kind of laying the ground for a lot of future work that you'd be doing, possibly.
Now, look, it was, I think by then, John Sinclair was already in prison, who had had a huge influence on me.
Can you just set the stage a little bit here? I know. I mean, I know this is stuff that other people have already heard,
Yeah,
but so many people
what
have
was
not.
going on in Detroit at that point were there were these sort of, you know, because Detroit is the working class town, so there were all these small but important things going on, and some of them were about, say, labor. I'd be Frank Joyce, you know, your first candidate, who was, he's my big brother, and you know there'd be the uh, marijuana LSD corridor, which is like John Landau and John Landau, which is
Sinclair?
yeah, John Sinclair, and you know whatever he'd taken up, and then you know, and then the whole anxiety over John being sent to jail theoretically for 10 years. That gave you something different to ponder. And, you know, but, you know, and then there are things like Frank would know more about this, but I knew it just from the point of view of my father was a railroad worker. And so I knew something about trade unions.
Mm-hmm.
And it brought it into a different kind of focus than anything else was doing. And that staring came out of that group of people that Peter had along with himself at the top of that, I don't know, whatever you would say, at the top of the ladder of, you know, but left-wing activist kind of journalism doesn't have, you know, that kind of structure,
Mm-hmm.
but it's there anyway. because it has to be to get the points out and get them repeated in such a fashion that people will understand them and connect them and move on their own.
Mm.
That was the goal. And Peter was extraordinarily, in my reckoning, Peter was extraordinarily good at that. And I always thought, I'd read other newspapers from other places, and I'd often come away just feeling like, yeah, I think they mostly got the story, but do they really have it? And they're giving it to people in a way, not just like, that whole stupid ass journalism cliche, tell them what they know, tell them again. It wasn't like that. It was like, tell them, move it along. Tell them, go back if you have to, move it along. And that group of people that I named, and of course there were any number of other people, they taught me as much by example. And these guys, it's Detroit. The cops aren't nice. So if you've got a dope dealer or something that you're kind of trying to not change to champion, there's a possibility you're going to get your head kicked in. And that could have happened in Chicago. Couldn't have happened in most of the real big center of the country, or I don't mean center of the country. There's any of the real big coastal, because everything was such a big news item that happened in those places. But this was just like sitting there, and it was journalism that was left on the ground, that if one or another of us didn't do it, it didn't get done. Some of these things were really important. They were important to the anti-war movement. They were important to the civil rights movement. They were important to what was being transformed into the music movement. And with actually an amazing number of different kinds of people with different kinds of perspective about it, that prevented it from becoming a dull roar.
That's why the term the movement was so popular, wasn't it? I mean, because it was really
that
broad,
whole thing,
ecumenical.
And that was what, if you were a kid like me, at least, that was what you were hungry for. You wanted to be in on the action in an intelligent way. And
at the time, I mean, you were talking about how you didn't get as much press in the Midwest as you would on the coasts, but of course, the arrest of John Sinclair ended up being something that John Lennon wrote a song about, which got the whole situation.
Now name the second song.
That was the second song?
No,
was that?
I'm saying, now name the second song. There is no second song.
No, that was the song, right? It wasn't a very good song.
It was like,
you wrote
if you were an 18-year-old kid and you have, and you're in that, and John from street corners and protest events and concerts, or
John Sinclair. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think what we in Detroit had ultimately was a lot more follow through and a lot more ambition, in the sense of, let's get this down so we can move on to the next thing, but also let's get this down because we're going to need to use it. That's how it always felt to me. And it wasn't, a large number of people who shared our perspectives on any given thing, not even the war. Actually, more sad, not even the civil rights movement. Was kind of a lot like now.
Right.
The hate was there at the fringes. It wasn't from our people. But
you identified at the time, at least in that article. I don't mean to focus so
much on
this one article, but
I like that article.
Yeah, me too. You identified yourself as a White Panther, as did John Sinclair, and I think a lot of people have never heard of that term or what it means, and they might get an entirely wrong association with what it means. And can you talk
Oh, and they
about what?
did.
Talk about that. What did you
Well,
mean by that? And what who were
that
the
was a
White
tricky
Panthers?
one because that was a tricky one because the Black Panthers, of course, were the voice, the media voice, and otherwise of the white. What am I saying? The White Panthers were the voice of what was sort of an attempt to create a Caucasian version of the the movement, the movement of for Black freedom, and the movement for, as it turned out, as it exploded, lots and lots of other things. And I, it, that all came out of John Sinclair's vision, really, in terms of that image of the Black Panther supplementing the or the White Panther supplementing the Black Panther. That was all, you know, uh, a deliberate attempt to create a kind of syndicate or whatever you want to call it. And you can see some of this actually, some of the recent films about Chicago movement and uh, the stuff about the things that cropped up around anti-war protests in Chicago and places like that. You can see that there, but I think in Detroit it might have been more organized. Maybe it's just what little I know about history. But when I talk to people, they don't have what this group of people who didn't agree with each other all the time. I mean, you get Peter and you get Peter and Sinclair and Frank Joyce talking about something, and they're ricocheting all over the building. That's good for young people. That's the healthiest thing that could have happened in a certain way. It would have been better if we were completely united, but I'm thinking in the realm of the possible here.
Mm.
and and so at least for me, that was my university. It really was.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a shaggy university. It was really well populated by serious people, and from time to time we had some fun.
Seems like more than a little bit of fun.
Well, we did, and that was part of the good thing about having marijuana wound into it.
Here, here.
Who was it? Which paper wasn't Werby, was it? We Believe in the Cosmic Giggle. That wasn't. Somebody had that on their newspaper.
I like it.
I think it was somebody in San Francisco, probably, but so that you didn't have a sense like that there were just these little narrow passageways through Exotica. It was a sense of this and this and this and this. It's like 2 + 2 = 6. I can't remember who I stole that from either.
I like it.
It was like that. It was, and it was, like Pun thinks this, and Marsh is sitting down there. He's so weird now. He's only listening to rock and roll records half the time, and but he's still trying to pitch away at it. And this one and that one and the other one. It was a brotherhood. I don't know if we knew how to, with our activities, sort of spell out something like that, that's that elaborate. But it was all encompassing. to a
Dave,
certain point, and then it fell apart, and that's what happens to movements.
right? Sure it does.
Greek is the first time you're in one, though.
Yeah, right.
Well,
Big,
because
big
you always,
movement
yeah.
of it achieved high heights and low lows when it fell apart, I guess, for a
Well,
lot of
your
people.
world is well. What happens there is your world begins to collapse, which is very threatening.
Yeah.
And you're very young and very inexperienced and probably not very well read. But then somebody will pop up who's been off dealing bubblegum acid or something. I can't even. I believe there was no such person, actually.
But there should be. Bubblegum acid definitely needs to be invented if it hasn't been. I mean, it wouldn't be hard, right?
It
Just
wouldn't
to
be very
put
good
a
for you.
drop in the bubblegum, but yeah.
It wouldn't be good for your teeth to start with.
No, no, it should be sugar free.
Many things were, because you needed that for another psychedelic. But it was, it felt, and when I talked to other people who grew up at the same time, or even back then when I was going around doing stories for whether it was Creem or Rolling Stone or whoever I eventually did them from, it was there, but it was splintered. And somehow the Detroit thing was more unified. And maybe that's just, I think that this is part of it for sure. That is the blessing or the legacy of all that labor organizing that was not alien to us. We weren't a bunch of kids who just came off the campuses. We're kids who came out of families where dad was building cars, and Uncle Tom was working on the electric union, or just working on electricity.
And your dad worked on the railroad.
My dad worked on a railroad. There was plenty of that going around, and it gave us, I think, a greater sense of solidity in terms of our actions. It was my pet, rock and roll, I think, that probably did a lot of damage and caused it to begin to fall out, fall apart. But I don't think that was entirely avoidable, because nobody was sophisticated enough to build the right kind of structure, and nobody had enough, or hardly anyone had enough education. Which, you want to change the world, you can change the world, no doubt about it. But if you want to change the world in a way that really matters, then you've got to learn what is that process. And you did some learning back then.
And then other forces are going to try to work against what you're trying to do too, and turn out all
that's
the
exactly the
commodities.
point. But here's the thing, okay? In these smaller units, what you learned was, even if they pick a few of us off, we're still going to be there if we want to be there, and if we try to use our resources intelligently. And so they couldn't really kill it off, because people got excited. And America boasts about a lot of things. It's really a pretty dull place in a lot of ways, very conformist and hampered by so many things, by its sexism, by its racism, by its classism, by its parochial perspective. And this stuff began gradually, I think, to infiltrate the thinking, not of students, but of kids. That was another free place. I don't mean it was free to get in or get out. I mean, it was a place where
there was room, there was space.
Yeah, well, there was that thing. I'm trying to think who it was who somebody asked him, what did it say on in the Bible on the on the Ten Commandments or whatever it was. And somebody said, well, it said thou mayest. That was John Sinclair. That was his whole thing. Thou mayest.
Thou mayest.
And
Please feel free. It said on the wall somewhere.
It's, it was a thing that after everybody else has stopped believing, you can still believe in that. And after a lot of partial failures and bigger failures and bigger than that failures, you could say, but wait a minute, we did that one thing, up there in Ann Arbor or over there in Flint, which is a town in Michigan, for those of you who aren't from there.
Great water.
Well, it had great water then. I'm not so sure what it has now.
Toxic sludge.
But anyway, it was like, but that is another thing about the Michigan point of view, which is that, I had a grandmother who was from, I don't know, she was from way upstate. And I think she was probably some kind or another of Native American. And, and then there were people who later went on to give us many of the most rueful things in history of that region. But, like some of them were putting together the apparatus that eventually did all that bombing and stuff against everything that was good about the rebellions we've seen in the last 20 years. And I don't think I'm that singular in that a lot of different pieces of that floated through my family and through my head. And it didn't do what you would think it would do, which is confuse the whole thing. It actually gave more sense that you could try something because all you could do was lose. But you have to teach somebody in a way that it's okay to lose on those issues because you're building something. And that consciousness was always in the meetings that you would go to. It wasn't sectarian to that degree, and that was a great liberator. It always is. I'm not saying that people got actually free, because I don't even know where actually free is. I don't think is there a town in New York?
That's right. Free is a town in New York.
Is there a town? I was going to say, is there a town in Michigan that's called Free? And maybe there is.
That's where it is.
It was all, it's possibility. Possibility. And I think a lot of people, if you had, like when I did my book about Woody Guthrie, with a lot of people who had been there from the early, from the early movement, mostly socialists and so forth, they all had kind of the same vision of what could be accomplished. Well, that seems irreplaceable. But my version of that is, and then all the kids got together and tried to figure it out. And that's just as true. You did not, having Karl Marx at your bedside would not hurt you. It would help you in a great many ways, but it wasn't essential to get anything done. What was essential to get anything done was hope and ambition and in the end, I think it's the way everybody who was involved in that, even in the peripheral way I was, I think it was about love. I don't care if I sound like a hippie. Because I was one for a while. but really, it was that human contact.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really, when you thought about it, whether you were talking about the civil rights movement or, uh, you know, Vietnam, any of those things, they had to find a source of their love in order to keep those movements effective.
Yeah.
And even a little kid, which is all I was, you couldn't miss it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the best part of everything. And it didn't mean you could become a slacker. It meant you had to work extra hard because you came to understand that this stuff could be wiped out in a minute. And you came to understand this, this the courage that people had. You know, whether you're talking about, you know, whatever you're talking about. You know, I was going to name some names, but that gets sectarian real fast.
Sure. Dave, you know, I mean, I think so much of what you're talking about also, I'm just, as you're talking about these things, I'm constantly thinking about how they also, everything you're talking about can relate to the power of music to it be a force for change and popular education and to foster that sense of community and love. And I mean, and I'm wondering about, I mean, I have a hell of a lot of questions that we're not going to get to. I know that, but when you started Cream magazine, what was the state of the music industry
I didn't
generally,
really
and were you
start the
thinking,
magazine very
oh,
Cream. It was a bunch of other
you weren't right on the ground floor. You
hippies.
were early on, but not on the ground
Yeah,
floor
I
of it.
was like, two issues or something.
Okay. Well, when you got into it, which was quite early on, what was that was what were you motivated largely by the potential of music as a tool for social change, or were you looking at the
I want to get my
disaster of
friends
the
out of
music industry at the
jail.
time? Or sorry, was that?
I want to get my friends out of jail.
Oh, that's good. That's
You
much more
know,
practical.
whether we were talking about London or Sinclair or whoever, and I wanted people to understand that this was not a goof. This was serious,
Great.
and that it had casualties like anything else like that, but it also could make a measurable, feelable difference to people who were otherwise in a huge jam. And if you're 16 or 17, you can't carry it beyond that. I won't pretend that I did at that time. But, and just to be the complete hippie here, let me mention to you that, like it says in the Bible, the greatest of these is love.
Yeah.
That's the fight. How do you, because you're not going to love a lot of people you run into. And a lot of them are going to try to unlove you to the point of the graveyard.
Mm.
That's all true.
Yep.
You had to worry about your friends, but you had to make friends. And that was a healthy product. It wasn't isolated. It wasn't people putting on a show. I mean, we were, but at the
But it was
same
a
time,
community.
the show we were putting on, well, I don't know, it was a scrappy little community.
But I mean, like
It
in the sense of
wasn't quite that easy.
the performer audience dynamic, it was more of
No,
a sort of a movement.
the dynamic was, how are we going to survive this? It really was. And so the fact that it was a harder place to do these things could itself be inspirational. And it inspired a lot of people. And you do hear from time to time people talking about, well, the Detroit movement, and then they don't quite know what to do with it because they didn't have the follow through. And, The reason why was the follow through there?
What did anyone have to
The
follow
follow
through?
through was there
What
because
do they mean by that? I
who
mean, in the
basically
sense,
hated everything we did. Let's go.
but what was, I mean, I don't know if anyone had follow through, right? In the sense that they mean it, but where they mean the term, but what was that were, I mean, it seems like in terms of like music and social movement, a lot of stuff, there was very particular, I
People
mean,
had
there's
taste. People had flavors. I mean, that's just your diet.
there's different, Detroit had a particular flavor, but I'd say Detroit and San Francisco both had a particularly powerful, disproportionately powerful impact on the sort of on working class culture in this country
But
and on the at that time in particular.
well, I don't think that the nature of class in San Francisco, having worked there around that time, and Detroit were very much alike at all.
No, but both very influential on the
Because well, I was going
national
to
scene.
say about San Francisco was classist. You know, it was about being hip. You could take somebody like me. I wouldn't have known hip if it bit me in the leg. I wouldn't know it if it bit me in the leg and the ass at the same time. I didn't know anything about being hip. I had like 97 cents in my pocket, and hip is expensive. That was where Barry Kramer was useful sometimes because he was a businessman, and you would get that perspective. So I think that it's that all the things that are open and all the things that can't be knocked down easily and all the things that people come to believe in that may or may not have ever had a had a relationship to reality.
When you analyze stuff in retrospect, you mean like the stuff that when you're looking back on history and things that happen and trying to when you like put new meaning on things that you weren't thinking about at the time is it, when you're trying to
Well, yeah, I mean,
understand the past.
I don't think there's any. This is where the advantage of being hippies or hippie-ish kicks in because you're not rigidly locked to a given ideology, and you're not. There's you don't have ways to do things. You have to invent your ways of doing things. You don't have any money. You have to. How are you going to feed people? You don't have any transportation. How are you going to move them? And I think that's something that the the axes of that were probably more like Chicago gets very close in there, important in there. Detroit stays important. LA in certain, I mean, not LA. New York in certain ways and not in certain ways because everybody, and everything. But the big thing was those things were competitive because everybody had a different vision, which is good.
Hmm.
But also everybody had a set of limits. That's the value of a police force. And so everybody had to figure out what's the way I can get out of here alive and what's the way I can get into here and inspire some more life. It's that whole thing. And that was, to me, that was the teaching. There were lots and lots of other things to learn, and different people learn them in different ways. And some people read Marx and Engels and were better off for it. And some people read John Sinclair and were better off for it. And some people just listened to the MC5 and were better off for it. Or, for that matter, you'd be amazed by how much jazz got listened to in those little hippie dens.
Mm.
because you had a guy in Sinclair who loved that music and who carried it forward with him like a banner and who had really good taste in it. And not just John, but John was sort of the lead, you know, the crucial force. But you could have all these things, and you didn't have to sit around so much as we do now and say, well, how do we do this? Well, we do it all these ways. I don't know. I don't know how we did it. We just did it. And I'm not arguing for a kind of like baseless nihilism or even a baseless anarchism. I'm just saying you got to work with each other to give each other courage and insight. And then you can not only change the world, but you can change it big time. And I've seen it done.
Dave, in doing journalism, whether you're talking about print or radio and all kinds of other mediums, I'm just wondering, like in the age of underground print newspapers and all kinds of stuff that was going on, that has happened in the past and is a lot less common now. Like if I mean, this is a really geeky question, perhaps. I don't know, but
Well, I
when
geek. No
when
question.
in
I'm a geek.
when okay, good. When Reagan deregulated radio in 1981, as soon as he came to power, and thousands of radio journalists basically overnight lost their jobs, and local radio, canceled their news departments pretty much immediately. I mean, there was like it was seismic
Yeah, that
changes.
was the big money. That was the big money. Uh, I wasn't working in radio yet, but that
You weren't
wasn't
working in it yet,
when it first. I wasn't working in radio then,
right?
but
But you were involved in
when
the industry
I was
in ways
involved
that
in it
would have
and
been
I
very
studied it some, and I will tell you that the politicalness of radio as a medium did not die in that thing. It was on a commercial bent. Yes, it was shrunken because they didn't have to do what they had to do before, you know.
they
But
didn't have to have a news department, for example. Yeah.
or they didn't have to, whatever they didn't have to. But the whole sneaking truth of that all those movements that we've been talking about is that sometimes you're better without permission.
Hmm.
Sometimes you're better off with a vision, as screwy as it may be, that carries you to the next step, or even to imagining the next step. That those are all valid things to happen, and a lot of them can't be controlled because they're so spontaneous. And I know that irks a lot of particularly Marxists, but it's true. I'm not saying it's the best route to go because you're going to have a lot more casualties, but you're going to have a lot of people who don't get the full picture. But the full picture at that time was so big, nobody got it all that I know of.
Yeah. And I know this is related, and maybe I'm totally skipping ahead to very much, but the past 20 years then saw this other like change in the industry, in journalism, in music, in the arts, in so many ways that were, I'd say, in so much,
You're talking
in
about
so
in the
many,
last 20 years, money.
yeah, the last one, like the internet. I mean, that was
No,
like
but
so much bigger.
what you're trying to talk to me about is that money became more central.
Well, I
More,
would say the music industry shrank by 80% to the big three labels, and money became concentrated in big tech, right? They're making lots of money, but the industry between what 1997 and 2017, I
look,
think like
look,
record sales went down to 20% of what they were, and now it's mostly streaming in terms of sales, like in terms of
who cares?
right. Yeah,
I
I
mean,
mean,
I'm a
but
hippie.
it hasn't.
I don't want anybody to sell a lot of records. I want them to steal
Good, good. Would you talk about that? I mean,
them.
what's been the
And
impact?
from the point of view of the way people thought about record sales then, everything you do on the internet now is theft. And they had to redefine sales and theft. And that has happened, and nobody noticed it. This is not my first I mean, I did notice it. This is not my first conversation about this phenomenon. But
What do you mean by nobody
hardly
noticed?
anybody tweeted, and partly people think kind of jackets, and one of the jackets is that things have to have a clearly defined beginning. No, sometimes sometimes somebody drops the atom bomb and it inspires the peace movement. Sometimes people are just trying to get a hamburger and it inspires a big piece of the freedom movement. And that's the problem with, I mean, at some level you can't control it and succeed. At some level you've got to turn it loose. At some level you got to say, let a man come in and do the popcorn, and all that got done. And that's why it was so much more productive now. Were all the productions good? Of course not. Because they were all built in this disposable, maliciously greedy, segments inside of capitalism, which does not value human life very much. But fortunately, we can't control everything. Because if we could, we'd immediately narrow, I think, not so much our ambitions, but just, our capacity to recognize change for what it is when it occurs. I don't want to take my grandson to a movie about how rock and roll changed the world. Exactly. I want to take him to a movie that tells him that the world is changeable, and not accidentally, and not haphazardly. That's a good message. And that's a message where really no decent person has to lose. But you got also to get rid of the idea that you can do it without work. No, you can't. I mean, that's just a flat no. You can't do it without work. You don't want to work. There's only two possibilities. One of which is that the work doesn't get done. And the other of which is that you're full of shit and you did the work anyway. You just don't know it was work, which is not a bad way to go. That was sort of how I wound up being a rock and roll writer. It's like, hey, this is neat. I get, to have pieces of paper where, not with my name on it, that was in there, but not so big, except when it came time to want to eat and sleep. But it was mostly, hey, this is a way, that people can communicate and that people can change things.
What
If people changes them in there, then it's dead.
What was your I've been a professional musician for the past 25 years, and I always tell people, it doesn't matter what the
You had a
critics
raise
think.
yet?
Sorry?
Have you had a raise yet?
Yeah, right. No, my rent doubled and my wages were cut in half by Spotify. But
Well, you could have been in the auto industry in 1965 and had the same experience.
it could have been way worse. Totally. I'm very happy in
This is
this
the same
industry,
experience.
really. But
You're.
But I always tell people what really matters is what your audiences think of what you're doing, and that's really, that what other people think of your music is really not particularly relevant. But as somebody who spent much of your time actually as a music critic, what do you think of what was your role as a music critic, and what is that?
Criticize
What
me
is that role? Sorry?
to describe music and just criticize it and try to fit it into meaning, because music is as great as we've ever said it is, right? But until somebody shows us how to use that music, so what? But some guy comes along, whether it's John Sinclair or John Lennon or Johnny the Boy down the street, or women for the first time in popular music history, women were in charge for a while. They still are, actually. I think that's the most underreported part of music in the 21st century.
That
Is
women are in charge?
women are in charge.
In what sense? There's a really
In the
interesting
sense that
BBC series on
Beyonce
this.
kicked everybody else's ass.
Say it again?
I said, in the sense that Beyonce can kick everybody's ass. That could
Uh-huh.
not have happened because it could not have been a woman. They wouldn't have accepted you, me, them, whoever would not have accepted a woman leading. And now, who do I try to listen to? I try to make sure I don't miss Beyonce. And if I go back a little further, well, Donna Summer couldn't have done that without Donna. And it's part of it is also that we get so hung up in having to articulate everything in words that we kind of elbow certain realities out of the scene. And that isn't really very good for anybody. But I like, Michael Jackson, if he hadn't turned out to be a perv, he was 12 years old and they changed the goddamn world. That hasn't happened since Jesus Christ.
Hmm.
And that's just history. And that, I don't know about Jesus' part, but that really happened. I was there for it. I didn't think that was going to happen.
Just the seismic impact on the music industry that he had in terms of opening it up in so many ways?
The impact on the world.
On the world.
Yeah, that stuff is transcendent in a way that merely selling records or even merely playing records or even merely singing songs isn't. Not until you build it into something bigger. And there are myriad examples in every part of culture where this happens to somebody and they write about it. Everybody thinks, isn't that odd? I wish we could do that now instead of going out and doing it. I don't want to sound like I think that these things will just grow if you kind of kick enough dirt over them. Mm. But it's a place to start.
Dave, when you think about the role that music can play, that when it's really working and doing something magical, are there any particular moments that in history that come to mind where music and a social movement was really fused in a way that was really pushing things forward?
I don't think music does that, or it does it all the time and people don't notice, one or the other. But those things, when what you were just talking about, that is, that's a social process. And music does not live in a society by itself without humans. So I don't exactly know the answer to your question, but I know what I think and after years and years of reading as well as writing about it and listening to it, and trying to figure out how to play it. Forget that with me. Um, it's and the other thing that we don't talk enough about is how beautiful it is. Because unless it's beautiful, I mean, I don't mean to say that heavy metal isn't beautiful, because it is. Just got to know how to play it or hear it, and disseminate it, I guess. And then you can have all these things begin to happen, and all those things lead to other things, just like any other car wreck.
But it has to be beautiful to start with. It's not just about whatever
Yeah,
they might
but
call content,
your
as if it's
beautiful isn't going to be my beautiful.
right.
Not in that climate. That's a lot of it is. Look, what you want to know, the single artist that I had a role in launching. You know who that was? It wasn't Bruce Springsteen.
Not Springsteen?
Nope.
No, who's that?
Iggy Pop.
Ah.
Nobody like Iggy had ever existed before. Nobody. And
what was so particular? What'd you say?
And succeeded because he was just unclassifiable. He was out of control. He wanted to be out of control. He wasn't afraid of being out of control. And the sneaky part about the son of a bitch is that it was all in control anyway, and by him, because that's just what Iggy's like. And that still inspires me in a way that almost nothing else that I've been deeply involved with does. I mean, it doesn't inspire me the way, I don't know, Bobby Blueland does, but it inspires me in a different way and for a different reason, and it's just about as important, because it sets me free, and it sets the people I love free, and it can't remove us from danger, but it doesn't have to give us a way out. It has to have to give us a way back in, and that it does sometimes. It's amazing to me how much with people like Iggy, as if there were any really like him, but that people don't get this, and most people don't get it. Most people think it's a freak show, which it might be on a given night, or even on a given year, or broader plateaus than that even. But that brings you back to the other thing, which is, well, what did you do with it? What did you do with it? What did you do with it that did the harm you wanted to do? What did you do with it that did the boogaloo the way you wanted it to? Is all those questions continually pop up, and they're never completely resolved. And they're not irrelevant when they're born, and they're not irrelevant when people lose sight of them. They just are.
Just endless part of life process there. Yeah.
Well, that's now I'm back to being a hippie. I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that. No, I'm just saying when you unleash something that seems simple, it isn't simple. If it's really, really good.
Mm-hmm.
And when you make something that looks really complicated, it don't mean shit unless you can get back to that simpler thing. It's not. You look at the charts in music books and stuff, and it's like it shows everything on a kind of set of vertical and horizontal lines, right? It's all happening in circles. It's all happening in a dozen different vectors and and dozens of different matches catching fire and burning things down. And somebody else picking up a pail of water and saying, let's not finish that one. Let's not finish burning that one. You know, and that probably sounds crazy, but I've seen it all happen. You know, and it can happen in music easier than anywhere else because music is the cheapest thing to reproduce. You can do it with just your thumbs. You can do it with just your lips. So why don't you?
Yeah.
And that's where being able to carry a tune screws everything up. Presuming
that.
Presuming that you want to carry a tune. I've been places where nobody did, and they weren't all bad. You don't want to hear about the percentages, though. You know, and that's, you know, and then you get back to that essential. That's a good way to get back to that essential question of form. Can you hold on to the beautifulness while you do something as ugly as Ted Nugent? You know, I've convinced myself at least, no, you can't, but you can come damned close, which is both frightening and inspiring.
I mean, that's interesting when you mentioned Ted Nugent's beauty, because I mean, I always say that music can play very different roles in different situations. Of course, you know, you can martial music.
I wasn't really trying to say that Ted was beautiful. I don't think very many adult men who run off, you know, with 16-year-old girls are, but you know, he brought a certain way that he attacked the guitar and things like that. Maybe a way to think about it is they needed invention, so somebody went and invented them. Or maybe they needed invention, so somebody went ahead and invited them. It could be either way. It's, you know, and this is all under one headline, which I love, which is a classic way of thinking about popular culture. Was that fun? I think it was Ted Allen, or one of those vaudeville comedians, had a routine where he had a big straw boater hat and a pair of scissors. And he got, you know, this is vaudeville day, or right after. And they take it out into the actual show palace, or whatever they call it. And Ted Allen, if that's who it was, somebody, I know where the book is, that I learned this from. And it's like Ted Nugent, what did I say? Ted
Nugent or Steve Allen?
No, it wasn't Steve Allen. God knows.
Not Steve Allen.
No, whoever it was.
Ted Allen.
Big Ted. I'll think of it. Probably tomorrow, but I'll think of it.
Yeah.
Anyway, and it doesn't matter who it is. It was somebody. And he gets out in front of this audience, and it's, you know, like one of those big vaudeville shows, which was probably, I don't know, 200 people or something. And he has a pair of scissors and he has this harmonica, say. And he's got two or three people from the audience that are standing next to him. And he says, do you know what funny is? The guy standing next to him is no, I don't know. Next guy, do you know what funny is? No. Next guy, ask him the same question, but before he can answer, somebody reaches over and cuts off the end of the thing that he's been working with, right? And so the guy says, well, is that funny? And after all this setup, everybody in the house is laughing except the guy who is there being had is not laughing. And he says, do you think that's funny? And the guy says, no. And he says, well, they do. They do. They do. That's how it really works. That's really spreading culture and changing the world. I know it's idiocy. This is one of the things you can learn from Iggy. Yeah, that's why it's important. It's idiocy. Because you wouldn't have done that unless you were jumping around like an idiot. And there's rock and roll right there.
Excellent.
You think people didn't laugh at Elvis in his suits that were loud and brazen and too tight, too loose, whatever it is? You think they didn't laugh at him? Of course they laughed at him. Then he turned it over and he laughed at them. Or he made friends out of it. You want to change the world? That's another way to do it. And it goes on like that forever. To me, the change in human culture goes on like that forever, I guess. Because it's never going to be that everybody learns that specific lesson. Nor does it have to be. But you never can stop going to school.
Excellent thoughts, all of them.
Well, I've been thinking about this stuff for a long time. And I've been bemused by it many times because people get so hung up in the form and get so hung up in propriety and so hung up in this and that. And really, if you took a 4-year-old out there and gave him a harmonica and a stick or something like that, though most of those people couldn't learn because they're too busy trying to figure out what the stick is for or whatever you use it for.
Do something with it.
Well, no, not necessarily. That is the most dangerous idea in the world.
Well, it's usually good for hitting on something.
People say, no, but what I mean is like somebody says, well, do something. Do you know what happens if you just do something?
That could be bad.
If you just do something, Martin Luther King dies. If you just go out and do something, some nut shoots John Lennon. No, you can't just do something. That never works, ultimately.
Intentionality helps.
I don't know how many before he killed John Lennon, how many guys do you figure that gunman took? I think that's the answer to that. nobody gets out alive is a lie. Everybody gets out alive is a lie. Somebody's going to get out, and we're going to make sure of it. That's society. It just is. And I mean, my thinking runs so heavily to the oddball humorist that people just think I'm goofing around. I'm not goofing around. I don't even know how to goof. I know how to goof well enough. My wife's down the hallway if you want to talk to her. But but I, it's people change each other, and they take chances to do it. And people are terrified of change, and they take chances not to do it. Somebody's got to do each of those things. Because if they don't, you're going to have still water, which may run deep, but it's still stagnant. And not very healthy. But at the same time, you got to let the river roll. That's true too. And what you have to do is stop worrying about what's true, because if you can do it and accomplish it, it's true. And if you can do it and you can't stop, it's not true. Because then it's sick.
That's more good advice.
If you just, listen to the guy who sounds smart. Listen to the woman who shows you what love is. Listen to the baby that cries. Listen to the baby that doesn't cry. And that's, that's where we all fuck things up. It's because you evolve past that point where somebody says, can you? And you don't say that, how do you know you can? And you don't say, thou mayest. But that's meaning that's a possibility. You don't say anything. And that's dead. My wife Barbara and I and her sister I want to say her sister Paula. It's my sister Paula. No. Mm-hmm. But our family, put it to you that way, okay? We lost a daughter to cancer. She was, I think, 23 years old. It's been a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And you should have seen that girl listen to music. She listened to music. Sorry, I'm feeling a little lonesome here.
This is
listen to music like it could change the world.
Yeah.
And I'd be perfectly willing to die in order to convince people that that's not a lie.
Hmm.
And that's something I learned from me. That's something I learned from Iggy too.
That music can change the world.
It did. Hell, you could, if I sat you down and said, I'm gonna cut off your right hand. You right-handed? Are you right-handed?
Yeah.
I'm not actually going to do it. You don't have to.
Oh, good.
If I sat you down and I said, if you don't do this, I'm going to cut your finger off, you wouldn't do it. But sometime it might come to you that unless you cut the finger off, unless you cut the hand off, unless you harm the surface in order to gain the reality, that's that's more evil and futile than anything else if you just won't do it. Out of fear, out of greed, out of whatever the reason is, you gotta you gotta try. And people don't want to try because they want to win.
The role of optimism and hope in the trying in the first
I'm
place.
sure that analogy I just used is really helpful. Yeah, it's more desperate. Uh, and desperate's okay.
But it doesn't motivate people as much as optimism does, it seems to me.
I don't know that. I don't know that for sure. God knows people create enough. People create enough desperation. They must get something out of it.
Well, there's that.
Exactly. But all this stuff's out there to be explored and tell other people about and lie to other people about and love and hate and make a society with. And that is the thing that I'm most proud of about being involved in rock and roll during this era because people tried and they didn't only think they won if they had a winner. I'm tired of that shit. And I just think that's kind of how it works. You got to shoot blind at it sometime, and at the same time be really careful that you don't hit any of those kids because that's a sin.
Dave, it's
So,
been such
I
a
don't know. I
pleasure.
pontificated enough for one day. I think I'm
That's
glad you
a
think
whole
so.
lot of good pontificating. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. It's nice to play a home game, as I always say when I'm in Detroit.
Hmm.
Um, and it's always nice to converse with smart people so that you guys went on two of those levels. And then I think one of the reasons why I do so many ridiculous things sometimes is to show people it won't kill you.
Hmm.
You gotta be willing to be a fool. That's another big Iggy point. When I sound like I'm trying to make an Iggy Bible here, I'd be okay with that. I don't think I would want to sit down and consciously do it because I think there are all kinds of dangerous spirits in that. But
We got a Church of John Coltrane in Louisiana, so there's some precedent.
just don't, just don't get cancer.
Yeah, Louisiana is a good place to do that.
No, isn't that what John Coltrane got? Maybe it's don't get.
I don't know, but there's so much cancer in Louisiana with all the oil. Cancer Alley, they call it.
Yeah, I know. It's you know, it's just you got to face it. You sit there. My daughter was dying, Kristen. She said to me, she said, "You better hope I don't die." I said, "Why?" She said, "Because Mom and Sasha, her sister, said they love you, but I like it. That's probably the greatest thing anybody ever told me, because that's how you live your life. If you can, you're given time and energy and all that stuff. And then sometimes you have to just walk up to them and give them the giggles. Nothing wrong with that either.
It's important.
And she knew it was funny when she said that to me. I mean, she was really, I think it might have been the last time I saw her really busted up with laughter. And it was just such a cool thing for somebody who was, I guess by then she was 19 or 20, 21 maybe, still be able to say that and get that riff off and hit me with the revelation at the end is like everybody, this is going to make me cry. Everybody thinks she lost. She won. And she did. I lost. Her mother lost. Her sister lost. Her lover lost. She won because she got to the end of her life, however short it was. And she achieved what she could achieve. That's, I mean, if I were talking to a cancer doctor right now, we probably just going to shake our heads. And we wouldn't be wrong to. But it'd still be the truth. Because the truth is the thing that, like it or not. Okay, I've wasted enough of your time.
Not at all, Dave. Thank you.
Kind of fun though, wasn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
I get to do all the talking. I always think that's all.
That's how it's supposed to be in an interview. Don't need to tell you that.
Is that what did you say? What was that thing you were telling me about?
Which thing?
Didn't you tell me that there was like some kind of rule or?
Oh yeah, the arc. Yeah, that didn't. Yeah, I gave up on the arc a long time ago in this interview.
But Noah could be just around the corner.
The arc? It could be.
You know,
I want to go on a ride in that
great
one.
club. There used to be a great club in Ann Arbor called the Arc.
Oh yeah, wonderful.
It's one of the founding places of Michigan rock and roll.
Oh really? I know of it more as like a singer-songwriter place, but that was like more.
Well, I mean, I lump all those things together.
Right. Good. That's best. They're best lumped together.
Well, rock and roll in the end.
Yeah, that's right. Good. I was going to ask you about that.
Even if, no matter how hard it fight, that's the real fun. No matter how hard, no matter how hard it and the people who are trying to do it fight, it's still all rock and roll.
It's still all rock and roll. Good. So we don't have to put it all in some stupid little box. It's just.
No, of course, I realized that I just rewrote a Billy Joel song.
Yeah, I don't think he can copyright those 4 words or whatever that is. 5 words, maybe. Yeah. Thank you, Dave.
Billy will forgive me.
Yeah.
Maybe. He's forgiven me worth. Yeah, this was fun.
Yeah.
Because talking with people who grew up in the same ground you did should be fun.
Yeah. I find that every time I leave the US and I meet another American, I have this weird experience of like, oh, somebody with familiar background. We can talk about something for about a minute here and have some common ground. It's the strangest thing. I never feel that way when I'm here.
I'd be careful north of Lansing. You don't want to think that and run into what they call themselves, the Michigan militia or whatever they call themselves.
I know what you mean. But
things are dangerous everywhere.
Everywhere.
But, it's fun to try.
Definitely.
And maybe that's what our conversation was about. or maybe it's about, well, what's the worst that could happen? Anyway,
Definitely.
that was fun. It really was.
Take care, Dave. I'll see you again.
Hey, if you're down this way, come and say hello.
Will do.
No, we got a good wine library.
I'd love to come back to Fairfield County
Well,
again
it may
sometime.
be that Frank Joyce has a better one, but you shouldn't tell everybody I mentioned that.
A library. Good.
All right. You take care.
You too, Dave.
Bye.
And thanks everybody for tuning into this interview with Dave Marsh. And check out landofhopeanddreams.co, where there will be all sorts of events happening every weekend throughout the weekend, this weekend, and for the next 3 weekends, talking about basically Dave and how he's influenced many different people in many different ways. And you can also read articles he wrote in the Fifth Estate in 1969 if you go to fifthestate.org and look him up there. And also you can subscribe to the Fifth Estate there, and you'll get Peter Werby's debut novel, Summer on Fire, about Detroit in 1967, where Dave also plays a role as a character in there. And although he might, it's not autobiographical entirely, but he might make appearances in there. All right, and I'll be back tomorrow at around the same time to talk to. Now, who am I talking to tomorrow? I don't know. I'll tell you tomorrow. But and until then, remember, mutual aid will get us through. Don't pay the rent unless you really have to. And bye for now.